It's incredible. Through community modding efforts, Star Wars Empire at War is still improving 20 years later. The mods, the battles, even the ships have only gotten larger and larger. But what if you had to take on one of the largest scale campaigns without the use of capital ships? That's what we'll be doing in today's challenge. So the mod is Star Wars Empire at War Thrawn's Revenge. The gameplay takes place after the Battle of Endor, and we will be playing as the New Republic. The rules are quite simple. We cannot build capital ships, nor can we use any we start with. That means Admiral Ackbar, usually the workhorse of the New Republic in the early eras, is completely off limits. Our goal is to capture Coruscant and the core worlds and to hold them for at least 5 weeks. What counts as a capital ship? Well, we'll keep it simple. The game actually makes the distinction for us. What it calls frigates and cruisers, but are really more support vessels, are in one tab. The larger capital ships are another, and the dreadnoughts, which of course we will not be touching, are in a third, which you need a big enough shipyard to see. So anything in this first tab is fine. Anything larger is completely off limits. So in terms of size and power, we're going to max out at like an MC-80 Liberty or a Dauntless. Now, while those are decently sized ships for the Imperial era, we're in the post-Endor time period here. Not only has the Imperial Star Destroyer, which is several times more powerful than the Liberty, became sort of the standard fighting vessel, we'll be fighting against the Dark Empire, massive Super Star Destroyers, and more. So when you consider the comparatively diminutive size of something like a Liberty, plus how old it is, I think the distinction really does fit. Now, there is one final rule, and I want to leave this up to you guys. Throughout Empire at War Thrawn's Revenge, when you play as the New Republic, there are opportunities to either capture or be awarded ships as you accomplish missions. Should I be able to use those? I'll put a pinned comment. Please let me know your thoughts down below. So our first step is to get rid of the ships we can't use. Now, there's no way to actually delete or sell hero ships, unfortunately, so Admiral Ackbar and Nance have been sent off to a faraway system. I'm going to see if I can somehow kill them off screen, but I want to make sure I don't accidentally take out some enemies because that will ruin the challenge. I also take some time at the beginning here to evaluate our forces and our territory. We're pretty spread out here. Our most important shipyards at Mon Calamari are relatively isolated. We've got other systems pretty much on their own, and without the possibility of protecting planets with large capital ships, my single biggest priority right now is to try to join up our territory. So I start shipbuilding near Sullust. Although somewhat risky, I also take some time to take apart some of these smaller fleets to combine them into one. With our game limits, we're going to need a lot of ships to do anything even simple. Now, this is an era progressive campaign. That means our technology will change as we play. Typically at this point, I would like to build 2 to 3 MC-80 Home 1 types simply because they can take so much of a beating, which is pretty rare among early New Republic vessels. We don't have that option right now. We also don't really have anything able to harm the most common powerful capital ship we're going to run into, the ISD. So early on, I focus on building an extra Liberty just because that at least does have semi-decent shields alongside as many carriers, especially quasars, as I can. Listen, if you're going to play like this and if you're going to rely on fighters, consider how many carriers you need. You probably need twice that many. I'm aiming for 10 quasars in my main battle group with Nebulon Bs and other small cruisers providing additional fighters. I also build a number of Corellian gunships to help target small enemy corvettes. We need to make sure our fighters are successful. That means anti-fighter vessels need to go. In Thrawn's Revenge, smaller ships are better at targeting smaller ships. So literally as I'm preparing my first attack, we get a mission. If we attack Duro, taking out a pair of transports, we will be gifted 3 Nova Cruisers. These are small Hapen vessels, and they fall within our allowed ship types. This is honestly a good warm-up for us, especially because I'm not as used to fighting without the help of large capital ships, so we convene a small force and we strike at Duro. And this battle teaches us a couple of quick lessons. First of all, it is going to be very difficult for us to operate anywhere near an enemy space station, simply because they're meant to hold off anything larger than powerful capital ships. Also, small amounts of fighters aren't going to do, so if we want to launch any sort of planetary attack, we're going to need to bring not just a token force. And it's kind of interesting. You'd think, because all of our ships are less valuable, losing one wouldn't be as big a deal. But on the other hand, it's not like when you've got Admiral Akbar and you can just throw him at the space stations without noticing, because a moment of inattentiveness doesn't mean some hull damage, it means a dead ship. So we simultaneously have more and less room for experimentation. Thankfully, the transports are quite weak. We have no trouble taking them down, but this force is not powerful enough to take out the 2 Golans we're facing. We retreat, having been warned about the difficulty we're facing, but also earning 3 Nova Cruisers, which hopefully help out later. We then choose our targets, and we're going with Vondark, and we'll take a quick look at the fleet. We have a total population here of 212, there's a max of 300. Much of that is made up of carriers. I don't have the full 10, we're at 8 now. We've got 1 Liberty, we'll meet up with another one later, and the rest is sort of a miscellaneous collection of ships, including dreadnoughts, which are good for their damage-soaking abilities, a couple of Dauntlesses, sort of the same, but also weaker than you might expect, and also a trio of Liberators. These will sort of be the heart of the fleet. They do provide some fighters and some long-range firepower, but they are very, very, very weak. Anyway, as the battle starts, we strike at Vondark, and thankfully there's only a small defensive fleet, but again, we can't take anything for granted with how fragile our ships are and how powerful these stations are. Now, in hindsight, I was a little too aggressive with my fleet placement here. My general strategy, however, is sound. The carriers go back, the Quasars, being the lightest carriers, are in the very back row. Now, you don't want to leave them at, say, the entrance of the battlefield, because they will spawn fighters, and not just the initial ones, but also backups. Then the Liberators I have in the middle. Now, I should probably put them even further back, definitely behind that Liberty, because these things go down quickly. Then the Dauntless, which are somewhat disposable, but also pretty durable, arm in my front alongside my Dreadnought class heavy cruisers. One thing you'll see me do throughout all of these battles is cycle ships off the front line. When a vessel is damaged, especially when the shield is down, we start moving it out of the way. Now, again, in this battle, not so important, but you can see my Dreadnought start taking some damage, and had I not cleaned out the defensive fleet, I would have started moving those Dauntlesses behind and had some other ships jump up. It's also why you don't necessarily want to place your entire fleet at the beginning. You want to see how your formation reacts to battle, what ships end up getting the most heat, so you can reinforce dynamically instead of relying on, your sublight engines to get you into a good position. Either way, the only real threat here are these smaller raider corvettes and frigates, so I jump in some assault frigates to help with those, and our fighters do a great job on the station. We end up winning the battle while taking only very minor losses. But this is a good illustration of just how much slower this method is. If we were with Admiral Akbar, we would have jumped the home one in there, not even worried about it, clicked fast forward, and the battle would have been over. With this, we gotta wait on our fighters, we've gotta wait on our less powerful ships to do the damage. Anyway, almost immediately after that battle, we get a counterattack by a small Imperial force at Tiburon. This is a crappy situation because they don't bring a lot, but enough to take out our 2 space stations, which is just a waste of resources. These are ones we got for free. Would have been nice to build up around them and potentially use them to stage a defensive fleet or whatever else, but ends up being all gone. To make matters worse, even though we're nearby, we can't jump there fast enough to take care of the fleet. They simply run after destroying our stations. However, on the way back, we do manage to catch a separate Imperial task force trying to re-establish a presence over Vondark, and we get a good opportunity to try small ship tactics without having to worry about an enemy space station, considering, we already blew it up. I take this one pretty casual, honestly too casually. I drop all of my carriers down, I make a small defensive screen, but Star Destroyers are potent and fast. Thankfully, like I said, the method of switching out targeted ships works really well, especially if you're proactive. Had I been too late with that assault cruiser, you can see at the top of the screen, its engines would have been out earlier and it wouldn't have survived. In Throne's Revenge, although bombers and fighters are good, it does take them time to wear through an enemy, especially if you're not doing a good job of micro-controlling each individual fighter so they're targeting different hard points. At this point, however, I also call in some of my smaller Corellian gunships just for some extra damage. This will end up biting me in the ass later, not in this particular battle, but I sort of learned that even when there are only a couple of ships left, you want to bring in your very small corvettes and gunships alongside your fleet. When they're like this, they will be targeted, they will be picked off. Even though the larger ships are less accurate, they still only need a couple of shots to go through. But you can see that the missile barrage from the right side of the screen is helping take down that nearly dead ISD. And this ends up being one of those situations where I just wish I was able to use the capture shuttles, because we'd be coming away most likely with 2 brand new Imperial Star Destroyers in our fleet. Either way, I call in those extra Dauntlesses just to refresh some of our damaged vessels, and we get through this one with 2 more ISDs down. Anyway, the subsequent ground invasion goes over well, with Luke Skywalker doing his best Dark Empire impression, standing down AT-ATs on his own. And with that, we get our first captured planet of the playthrough. Next up, we launch an attack on the next world, Santra 6, and I'm expecting significant enemy forces here. Honestly, not too bad. Again, as we'll see in a second, another defensive station, but aside from that, just a few Star Destroyers. So my tactics here end up being largely the same. I drop down a bunch of carriers and some support vessels, trying to goad the protective ships away from the space station and its escorts, but they do not budge whatsoever. And this, I thought, was going to be one of the big problem of the playthrough. I jump even more ships in to try to goad the enemy. They do not come. But as I'm launching my fighters en masse, I have an idea. I drop a couple of bait ships close enough to the Star Destroyers and they will come. So that's one good bit of advice. If you're trying to get Star Destroyers or whatever away from a defensive station, it's not necessarily how many ships are in the battle, but how close they actually are to the enemy vessels. Now, I do lose a couple of ships doing this, unfortunately, but I do pull the Star Destroyers out. And by that point, they're engaged, they're aggressive, they run into my fleet. Honestly, I'm a little too lax with my fighters, so I have to pull a couple of ships again off the front line, but their shields are down by the time they start running into my turbo lasers, and again, another victory with only a few small losses. At this point, we have lost ships, which honestly, early in New Republic playthroughs, you often don't see, simply because the MC-80 Home 1 eats everything. But all of the losses so far, and throughout this entire episode, really end up being pretty minimal.
Attack that target. Can't shake 'em.
The last planet, Ariadu, honestly ends up being much of the same. I use smaller ships to goad the Imperial Star Destroyers away from their defenses. I layer my fleet so that the more durable ships are first. The Liberators with their long-range weapons are at the heart. Then the carriers are in the back. And again, we try to get the fighters out as quickly as possible so that we can take out Sander Delvardis, our first major warlord, and his escorts. I'm sure we'll look at fighter tactics in later episodes, but generally, if they don't have decent defenses, I will just throw all of my X-Wings and Y-Wings straight at the Imperial Star Destroyer. In TR, there is no missile pass-through, so ideally you take down the shield, of course, then your first target in most cases will be the engines. If you're fighting multiple Star Destroyers, nice to take down the engine because it means you won't have to fight them at the same time. One will arrive at your fleet before the other. If it's just one, you can really just strand it. It'll only have its long-range weapons peppering you, and your fighters can continue to do damage. Still, we do lose the most notable vessel of the episode in this battle, a Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser, which just eats it from mostly the heavy munitions of that Victory Star Destroyer, but otherwise, our formation remains strong. That being said, keep in mind we're facing a fleet which, in terms of fleet points, is significantly less powered than ours, and they're still very, very threatening, so we'll have to be pretty careful in every single engagement we deal with.
Standing by.
After another very, very long and boring ground engagement, we do manage to capture Santra 6, and at that point, Delvardis' Warlord faction actually splits, and after a brief space battle, we're able to capture both Ariadu and Sluis Van. We do lose most of our ground units actually capturing the planets, but the important ones, our heroes, are completely fine. But that leaves us near the end of part 1 of this playthrough, and look at the territory here. We've got a nice little buffer against Imperial aggression. We've got some worlds we can use to pump out not capital ships, but frigates. We've got some worlds we can set up to use for resources. My big concern here is simply to start worrying about protecting what we do have. Again, not many ships. If the Empire or the Hutts or really any faction pushes hard on our planets, they can get through. So my goal moving forward will be to continue building ships and to connect with our other fleets in the northeast. I mean, at least if you guys like this video, this is certainly a different Empire at War playthrough. It's a little more, editing intensive on my end. So let me know, would you like to see part 2? Should we continue this campaign and maybe afterwards start a new challenge campaign? I'm having a lot more fun than I was in that long, slogging New Republic playthrough we were playing before. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you.